Well, hello and welcome to yet another FileMaker tutorial video taking a look at FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these tutorials over at FileMakerMagazine.com. Now in this tutorial, we are taking a look at the wonderful new FileMaker 13, the release of new features and updates. Now, one of the things that I always like to do whenever there's a new release is I like to go over all of the different details and sort of know where things are, how they are going to relate to me, in particular to you, because you're the one watching this video, and just so I can get myself up to speed, because a lot of the times the marketing speak that FileMaker uses doesn't necessarily give you the inside details and doesn't give you the frame of reference, which is what I'm going to do, giving you some dialogues, some snapshots, and taking a look at some actual files. So let's head into FileMaker 13. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to start off with is this file that I have in front of you, which is FileMaker 13 New Features. Now, this is a clone or a shell of a file that I created for the purpose of studying for FileMaker certification. That is not this particular file per se, but it is a copy of that file with FileMaker 13 New Features added into it. Now, the reason that I created this is because I always like to be able to see what are the specific details of individual functions and features that have been added. So what you need to know is if you download this file, it really depends on you having a copy of FileMaker 13. If you don't have FileMaker 13 installed, as of the recording of this video, it may not work. That's because this file directly references the help that is stored on the actual computer of the FileMaker application. FileMaker does put its help up online, but I'm shooting this right after FileMaker released, and they don't have the FileMaker 13 help up online. Now, the way that this works is you go over to the side, and you can select on this, and you can see that what I'm doing is in this web viewer area, I'm simply loading the internal help. We can see that right here by the fact that it says FileMaker Pro 13 help. Now, this has a list of all of the new features within FileMaker Pro, but all of these new features I've broken out into this sidebar area where you can take a look at specifically encrypting database files. So basically, this file is just a pointer to all of the different things that were added. For example, if you want to look at the base64 decode function or the get current time UTC, get device, this is where you can go into the specifics and find out all of the information about how that function actually works. And because it's only filtering down those features that are new, it really helps you out if you already are familiar with previous versions of FileMaker Pro. Now, I'm not going to be going through this particular file for this video. I'm actually going to be going through a PDF which I created, which has a walkthrough, which you can also use the PDF, but you can also watch this video, which you are right now, in order to get a sense of what the new features are. And these are screenshots of the dialogues, because honestly, going through all of the new features within one video would take far too much time. And I want to go pretty quick, give you an idea of what's available, and then point you to the resources you can use, such as this particular file. So let's head over to the PDF and take a look at it. Okay, so we're going to have to knock this out in relatively quick fashion because obviously you don't want to sit here for 53 minutes. And as you can see, this is page 1 of 53. So even if I took a minute on each one of these items, that would be 53 minutes. And I know you don't want to sit here for that. Now I'll let the major items speak for themselves as I scroll through this document. We've got the startup screen. The first big one is FileMaker WebDirect. It basically replaces instant web publishing. This is what the dialog looks like. You access it through the file menu, and it's basically the same thing as, it looks the same as the old sharing, which the sharing dialog is still there. There are some new layout elements which you've inevitably heard about by now at the time of this video. One of them is called a popover, and I consider it a subclass of the button because you hold on the button tool and then it reveals popover button. The same thing will apply to sliders. So this is what the popover layout looks like, and I'm not going to read all of the content that we have on screen here because you can obviously download this PDF and read it at your leisure. It has all of the different callouts as to what I actually indicate within the text, but this is basically what a popover looks like. You have your button here, and then when you click on that button, this popover shows up. Now you can see right here, as I zoom in, that you can actually change the orientation. You can, of course, change the name and specify that via calculation. You can also set script triggers on that popover in order to make things happen. all styling within the inspector palette can control all of your different attributes of this popover. Next thing we have, next major layout item is slide controls. Just like we had with the popover, when you select on a button, a slide control I consider more or less a subclass of the tab control. The tab control, or the slide control is basically like a tab pane or a tab panel, tab control without the actual tabs. Alternatively, you get the option to have the buttons or the little dots down at the bottom. But as you can see, you can actually turn those off right here by enabling the turning off the navigation dots and enabling the swipe gestures. You can turn that off for mobile, but that's a mobile specific feature. On the Macintosh, you actually have to click the individual dots, or what would be advisable is basically putting buttons that you could have in order to move through the different panes or put them within the pane, wherever you want. All you're going to be using is the go-to object. Next thing we have is the ability to change theme options. Now, the way that this works is any styling that you apply within the inspector, that is stuff that you can actually save your modifications to default styles that FileMaker provides. Now, there's one new default style. It is the Aspire that we see right here. And that basically comes with a number of sub-styles. Within that, each of those styles is going to, I'm going a little crazy there with my highlights. Each of those styles has multiple different variations, and you can override those, save them to the modified theme within the actual file. And what happens is that file then carries all of those modifications, and you can give it to someone else, and they can then import those modified or those updated styles. That's done down at the bottom here with import themes. Next item we have is encryption at rest. Now, this is only something that you get through the FileMaker Pro Advanced, but basically there are some checkboxes that you can see right here that says enable database encryption or re-encrypt files. It will also turn on by default this extra option of create error log. Now, one thing you need to know that I make mention here is if you also remove the admin access from a file, you will not be able to use the remove database encryption. And what this does is it creates an additional password, which you can see in the dialog here, and that password needs to be entered on top of the actual password for gaining access, unless the file is set to open with a password by default. Now, from a usability standpoint, as a developer, the new field picker is a huge advantage to being able to work with it with FileMaker 13. In fact, I'm not even used to working with the field picker yet. It shows up as a HUD display. You basically click this little button right here, this field picker in the status area. The HUD comes up and you can now search for fields. You can sort them according to FileMaker's default options that you also find in the Manage Fields dialog. You can edit and go into the database right here. You can select on which table you want to add things, whether it's a related table or an external table. All of your fields can be renamed by double-clicking them right here. You can click in order to change their actual type. You can see that I've right-clicked in order to either delete the field or access field options, all within the field picker. And you can, of course, create a new field. And then with regards to your dragging, you can drag with field placement in either vertical or horizontal, and you can control whether labels are on and what their relative positioning is. FileMaker Go has a new feature, which is insert from device. So this is basically specific to FileMaker Go, but it now allows you to specify things such as the front or back camera, what resolution, and we have a new feature which we're going to see of barcodes, which is coming up right here. We've got native barcode support for FileMaker Go. It uses the on-device camera, and you can see there is a list of all of the different barcodes that are supported as taken from this particular screenshot. And again, just like with actually capturing an image, you can decide whether you want to specify or scan from the back or the front, and at whatever resolution. Of course, in this case, it doesn't necessarily apply full versus medium versus whatever, unless you're going to use a container field. One thing to note is with barcodes, you can either store those into a container, which stores the image and the actual textual information, or the text-only information if you're scanning into a text field. Now, the layout script trigger on layout size change is one of 3 different script triggers. There's actually only 2 script triggers that are new, but one of them was renamed, so it seems like there's 3 that are new. The on layout size change works in conjunction with a new function called Get Window Orientation. We can see that right there. That allows you to, and as well, you can use the older window functions. You can actually determine whether a user has rotated or oriented the device. You can even determine whether the device is actually upside down or not. And on regular desktop, what happens is as you drag, it doesn't fire these triggers, but as soon as you release the mouse and the window has been resized, then it will actually trigger that script. We also have another, or the second of the two new script triggers, and that is the on gesture tap. Now this is a FileMaker Go mobile specific thing. It works in conjunction with the get trigger gesture info. So this is where you can actually, you can see right here, I'm very excited about this one. You can determine whether there was a single tap with 1, 2, or 3 fingers at a time. A lot of different options, or a one finger double tap. Now, swiping between records was also added in FileMaker 13, and that's done with 2 fingers as you swipe across the screen in order to advance from one record to the next or to go back. We have an on-panel switch script trigger. Now, this is a change because formerly it was called on-tab switch, but now because of slide controls, it has now been renamed to on-panel switch because a slide control is also a panel-based widget. So that's going to work the same way that it has before. Now, appearance styles. As I mentioned, because a file carries a theme with it, we now can modify all of the different styles and we can save them. That's all controlled with these little arrow widgets that you see right here. When an arrow turns red, that means you've modified the default style. And if you click on this, you'll then have the options to either save that style into the file or into the theme, and that's when you can transfer the file to someone else if they want to use your modifications. On top of that, you can see that right here, we've got the new ability to not only copy and paste from the whole of an object, which we had in 12, but we now have the ability to copy and paste from individual style settings, which is very important because a typical scenario would be that you have a normal button, you apply a gradient, but then you want the exact same gradient for, say, the paused state, but you just want to vary it by just a few subtle percentages. Well, that was a real big hassle because you had to go and manually do that. Now you can just copy from the normal, select this widget, go to the pressed, and then apply the exact same style, and then tweak it as desired. Now, the Inspector Styles panel is where you're going to access all of the information about all of the individual objects. When you select an object on layout, it's only going to show those styles that actually apply to that object, but you have this checkbox that allows you to show all of the styles, and it will show all of the styles for that whole file. But of course, unchecking it, it will just show those styles for that current object that you have selected. Now you can see right here that this is what I'm talking about, that little red arrow. You can save as a new style, or you can save changes to the current style. Now what this means is that the theme that you've chosen for a layout, which works on a layout by layout basis, if you save the changes to the current style, you're not actually changing underneath that actual theme for any future file. You're only changing it for that file in particular. And so that means when you go to another layout, if you change it from one theme to another, that theme that you had made modifications to will have those modifications included. So here we've got a fix. The shift key constraints has been fixed. It actually wasn't broken before. You just had to hold down the shift key before you actually clicked on, selected, and dragged the object, but it's fixed now. We have a new layout report dialog. Now, off the bat, this usually doesn't jazz me too much because all of these widgets as a developer never really help me. But in this case, this one does. So I suggest where formerly, if you were used to going and creating a blank layout, go ahead and use this layout now, because the one really big feature is the fact that when you choose a form view, FileMaker no longer actually selects all of the different, or doesn't allow all of the different view styles. So for example, it only uses the form view as a checked box in the view options and leaves off the list and the table view. So it makes it really nice. And not only that, it actually automatically sizes the layout to the sizes that you want. So this is a really good enhancement in terms of creating your layouts. List view indicators are now optional. Hooray! This one is absolutely awesome. That normally when you're in list view is the area over to the side when you are taking a look at list view and it's got that 3 little pixels, you can turn that off. In fact, it's off by default, and you actually have to go in, off by default on new files, but you have to go in and actually turn that on if you actually want to see this. And you have control over these as well. That's because if we take a look at this new feature, a change, the alternate body part rows, we can see that we've got the ability to alternate row state, but we also have a new feature of use active row state, where formerly we had to use a technique which would save into a global, and then on record load trigger would actually load, and you determine whether that was the current selected record, and then use conditional formatting. That is all gone now. Hooray, hooray. We can now use the active row state. And as you will see right here, new layout row states, they have been moved, where formerly you were able to select a color, but now you have the full control of the inspector, which is what you would expect. And you can see that on the active row state, you have the primary, the alternate row, and of course the active row with the ability to apply all of those different states, including gradients and all of the other coolness, such as images as well, which you can have on body parts or on layout parts. Now here's a small one, hide page breaks. This is something that I always used to go in and actually set the dimensions using the page setup and set it to a tabloid size just in order to get these page breaks off the screen and keep my layouts clean while working in layout mode. Well, that's gone now. We can actually turn it off in terms of the view menu. The next is tab names via calculation, and this one combines with the one after it. You can see we have a dialog here, a calculation dialog for tab names. Absolutely awesome for localization. And likewise, we have the same now for dialog buttons. Again, the ability to use the specify, which is pretty much was everywhere except for these few areas where you had to have static values for your button names on your dialogs and your tabs, but that's all fixed now. Thank you very much, FileMaker. I love it. Now, one of the big features that people are loving is the ability to now hide an object using FileMaker's calculation engine. That's found under the Behavior tab, or the Behavior subsection, in the Data tab of the inspector. So this button, for example, I would be able to say hide this if the get account privilege name equals full access, which wouldn't make sense in this sense, but you get the idea. You can change it, you can hide anything based on any condition. And here's what's great about hiding. It also works for all of the enclosed objects. If you hide a tab control, or if you hide a web viewer, or if you hide a portal, anything that's enclosed, well, obviously nothing's enclosed in a web viewer, but if you hide a portal, everything within that portal becomes hidden as well. So this is going to be a real big boon to being able to hide and show things based on all kinds of different conditions in your solution. We now have, and this is a geeky feature, but it's one that you need to know about, support for HTTP and HTTPS post. This comes in the form of actually a change in the actual URL. Rather than specifying HTTPS for your URL, you have to use a custom scheme, which is HTTPS or HTTP post, then the rest of your URL, and any value after that, after the question mark, which supplies all of your different tokens or fragments. I forget what they're called at this point in time, but basically all of these are passed to the actual page. Now, what makes this really nice is you're now able to interact with web services in a much more fluid fashion, which is really nice. Now, underneath this, we have an updated, the SQL range support was added to FileMaker's SQL, or its internal SQL. So execute SQL using that now, you're going to see that we now have offset and fetch first, which allows us to grab ranges of records. Say you want to get the 25 records after the first 25, you would basically say the offset is 25 or maybe 26, and then the fetch first you would specify would be 25, and that would grab records 26 through 50, or if you start at 25, either way, I think you get the idea of what I'm talking about. You can specify where you start and how much you want to grab. Now here we get into the script steps. Very big one with regards to performance, especially if something is taking a long time on the client. Perform script on server. You're going to want to take a look at that because there are a lot of techniques that are going to come out of using perform script on server. Of course, this won't apply if you're on using FileMaker's peer-to-peer. There's also a new script step called refresh object, something to pay extra special attention to, because one of the reasons that FileMaker doesn't have, say for example, drop shadow support on FileMaker Go is because it's very expensive to make a lot of redraw and repeat redraw on FileMaker Go in particular. In fact, they have a much different caching mechanism on FileMaker Go than they do on FileMaker Desktop, because the processors, while they're getting faster and faster, just aren't up to the same speed as a desktop by any means. So when you're going to be scripting, you need to be much more precise and specific now. Take control, and you're going to notice performance gains if you know that what just got updated in terms of, let's say, a global variable, and that global variable is controlling some conditional formatting on some text or a field or a button, then you can actually name that object and then tell it to specifically refresh. So that's my advice with regards to using refresh object. Insert from device, we already saw that. You have all of the different options that come with that. Another new script step, set script animation. This is very much like the set error capture on and the allow user abort. By default, script animations will not show when you're running a script, because it's assumed that the script needs to run as quickly, as efficiently as possible. If your script does need to show the user what's going on in terms of as the script happens, maybe you've got multiple different pause steps, then you're going to want to set script animation on, because by default it's not on when you run scripts. And you can see that up here it does actually work or apply to Mac and iOS, but for some reason within the docs it says it doesn't apply to Windows. Here's another small little one that you need to know about. That's close popover. When you click on a button and it is a popover button, that popover comes up. If they click on something else, then that popover typically closes, but if part of your process is using a script, obviously you need to be able to close that. Another script step, upload to FileMaker Server. Now this one is a side effect of the changes that they made to FileMaker Server and how you actually interact with it. They formerly had a Java-based admin tool for administrating FileMaker Server. They changed that to an HTML5 tool, removing the need for Java on the client for a person to be able to remotely administrate FileMaker Server. The side effect was that you cannot upload a FileMaker file through the admin console. I don't know why, because HTML does support the ability to upload, but currently the way that you upload a file in FileMaker 13 to FileMaker Server is using the upload to FileMaker Server. There's a script step, and there's also a button within the toolbar. Let's see, wow, we're at 31 out of 53. Let's go a little bit fast here. Open Manage Themes, that's really no big deal. That's just a script that supports a menu. Show Hide Menu Bar is one that only applies to WebDirect, the new technology, and basically turns that on or off within the web. Summary field, we've got a list summary, which is basically similar to the list function. It's just been given a place within the summary fields. Easier file uploading, this is basically a screenshot of the share. It's everything that I talked about with regards to uploading there. You can see here is a screenshot of the menu where sharing. You can see that you go upload to FileMaker Server. There's all the way down there at the bottom, configure for FileMaker WebDirect, which we saw at the very beginning of this video, and then of course share with FileMaker clients. Both of those dialogues looking the same, just one of them got its new menu for WebDirect. Reset file unique ID. Now one of the things that's going on behind the scenes is FileMaker is allowing certain files to have relations to other files based on its internal ID. If you want to break that, the internal ID of the file itself, if you want to break that, you can actually reset the unique ID. This is accessed through the security or the manage security dialog under the file access tab. Don't have any advice with regards to when you might want to use that, but I'm sure those who will need to use it will find it when they need to use it. You now know about it. The Inspector Advanced Graphics section. We have some additional controls, some of which didn't make it in it, which I wish they did, and that would have been, I would have loved at least some positional control of graphic objects on buttons. Of course, if you're familiar with my theme studio, you can still tweak everything you want behind the scenes if you are not afraid of CSS and getting in and taking a look at that. But what we do have access to is outer shadow, inner shadow. Both of those, remember, do not render on FileMaker Go. We also have access to padding, so just a little bit in terms of some of what's going on underneath. Not as much as I'd like, but I imagine there is more coming. Touch keyboard types. This is accessed through the data area of the inspector, but on mobile, you now have access to different keyboard types such as ASCII, URL, email, 3 different styles of numeric, and a phone input. You can see all of those in the pop-up in this PDF. We also have additional formatting options. There's just 2 of them at the end that you're going to see, and this applies to date, time, timestamp, but also applies to the 3 different settings that you have on numeric fields. Here you can see that we have a short system date and a long system date. The middle, or the medium, which is on Mac OS, is not on Windows. That's why you only see the short and the long. But if we scroll down here, you can see that we've got new additional formatting options for numeric fields. For the decimal, currency, and percent options, we also have a system settings checkbox where we can use whatever specified within the system. So those are some helpful formatting options. Here's a small one within the file options for each file where you can specify the opening account and password, also specify the starting layout, your on first window open and your on last window open, your on window open and on window close. Script triggers, you're going to find the minimum version allowed where you can specify what version of FileMaker is actually required in order to open that file. I still suggest that you actually use a script in order to do that because that's where you have much more control. This feature is probably just going to show FileMaker's dialog saying you need to use a newer version of FileMaker. You don't have control over that dialog. This is just one of those features that they threw in because they consider FileMaker an end-user database. From a developer perspective, I would just leave this set to the lowest one. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Now here we get into our functions. I'm obviously not going to go through them. Base64 encode and its companion decode. Those are both going to be useful when you actually have an image in a container and you want to reference and use that within a web viewer, being able to use that base64. Now, I don't believe if IE still has limitations, but if you have too much information in terms of a base64 image, it may not render. Usually good for icons, but definitely not necessarily for high-resolution images. We have get connection attributes, which allows you to determine the connection of FileMaker, whether it's hosted or on FileMaker server, and whether it's using an SSL certificate. Get device, which you could do with the, I think, get platform or get application version, but they made it a little bit easier now with get device, where you can just actually determine, is this the Mac, PC, iPad, or iPhone, iPod Touch. Very straightforward. Get modified fields, a nice feature which is going to be used probably a lot for syncing and for audit logging. And that's basically going to say, what are the modified fields? If these are the fields, then I'm going to log the fact that they were the ones that were modified, changed from what to what. So you'll see a lot of audit logging solutions come out as a result of this new feature. It also, for example, includes, I believe, summary and unstored, I believe I read on Twitter, but I'm not exactly sure. You'll have to check that out. Get network type. This is a Go-only function, but it basically allows you to determine if you're on a cell network, Wi-Fi, what have you. A get script animation state, probably going to be used in conjunction with the script animation on or off, depending on whether you want that to show within the process of your script running. Get trigger gesture info. This is the one that I was referencing, where you have access to knowing whether it was a single with 1 finger, 2 fingers, or 3 fingers, or a single double tap. Very cool. Very excited about this one. We're doing good. Getting close to that 53. Get window orientation. We talked about that. Here you can see again where I show that you can, where I mentioned that you can actually even determine whether it's upside down. Look at all the way down there at the bottom. We have that number 2 for portrait upside down. Pretty cool that you can actually determine that the device is turned completely upside down. Get encryption state, which is a companion to the fact that you can turn that encryption on. Then we have current time UTC milliseconds. So they basically renamed this from what was discovered in FileMaker 12, that this function was there just hidden within FileMaker 12. Now we have get container attribute. This is going to be a metadata function, which if you're familiar with EXIF or all of the different attributes of MP3s or all of the different things that relate to a media file, this get container attribute is going to grab all of that data off of that object that's in a container field. So this is going to be really helpful in a lot of situations if you're dealing with a lot of media, and especially with the fact that we can store media data external to the container and not shoving it all into the file. That and this function really makes those two features feel like FileMaker and media has arrived. It's really gotten there. So here we are, we're at the last page. Of course, on this PDF, I gave a nod to being able to, or to coming to the magazine site. You're watching this because you're already familiar, but if you pass this around to your other FileMaker friends, associates, or people that you know, I appreciate the support. It allows me to continue to provide this service. Your support as well, duly noted. I hope that throughout the course of this video, you've gotten everything that you wanted to know. There are going to be some minor nuances of a bunch of different little things here and there in FileMaker, because this did not cover every single detail, but it covered all of the major key points. I'm pretty sure I covered about 95 to 97%. For that last 2%, we're going to find out things that may be in there that we didn't even know about. It always happens with FileMaker. So I would like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker database development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.